you think of this as kind of a parable, it could be applicable to the present moment, where you also could, point to like divisions within society, and to some degree it is about an argument about to what degree should we be oriented towards the gods of other nations because it's good for the economy or because it actually works, or whatever, versus to what degree should we be oriented towards Akadosh Baruch Hu, and that there's a sort of conflict between factions over that, that there's something very practically difficult about getting out of that level of division by just having one side convince the other that they're wrong and they have to completely change how they approach things. And that's represented in this altar that Eliyahu builds by the 12 separate stones that represent the 12 tribes of Israel. Like that, the idea being that stone is this thing where when you break it apart, you can't just put it back together. You can't make one stone out of 12 so easily. And that the proposal was that if you're not going to go all the way to getting the whole nation to everyone reflects on what they're doing that doesn't make sense, they realize how to turn towards Hashem and keep his Torah better, and everyone's on that page together. That's not what's going to happen, because that's generally not the case. It's generally not the case that something like that can happen overnight. Then what can happen, so to speak, overnight is a kind of unification of the nation on the basis of the best thing that they could do that's actually within reach, which is not to fully embrace Hashem together and his Torah and all of that, but to turn away from other gods, to turn away from idols. So the thesis, in short, is that Eliyahu represents the idea of unifying the nation by getting people to realize that the idolatry that they have been caught up in doesn't work, and that they need to turn to Hashem and put their trust in him. And what the story of the competition with the prophets of Baal and Har Carmel in Mount Carmel ends up therefore reflecting or demonstrating is that that's how the nation can kind of earn the wonders of Akadosh Baruch Hu, like that the fire comes down and miraculously consumes the whole altar. And the point is, it's the whole altar that takes the 12 stones that represent the tribes of Israel and it makes them into one thing. And Hashem says, I want you to be unified. I want you to be working together. And I'll also, give you a way of unifying that isn't just compromising and making a polytheistic pantheon that everyone's happy with, that isn't just sort of meeting you halfway on idolatry, but at the same time doesn't create this impossible requirement of everyone doing complete tshuva and fully turning to Hashem and fully embracing his Torah and all these things that it's practically speaking difficult to even get individuals to do, at most points in their life, let alone to get a whole nation or a whole kingdom to do. And so that what Hashem essentially is showing through this with Eliyahu is that the opportunity is for substantive unity of the nation to be achieved on the basis of rejection of foreign gods. That's the thing that you actually can get people to do together in the short term while they're still kind of learning the way. And in the merit of that alone, we get to see Hashem's wonders, and he shows us that he's with us and that we've made the right decision, and that it's an acceptable basis for national unity that is also a practically achievable one when there's so much division and so much idolatry. And this also was paralleled in reference in that passage to the first Paschal offering, the first Korban Pesach, because there the idea again was, everyone sacrifices the sheep and blasphemes the gods of the Egyptians and paints the blood on their door. And that's not a whole Torah, but it was enough for the nation to kind of be born together as one nation and to be protected together and given Hashem's miraculous sort of safety that he provided during the striking of the firstborn in Egypt. So that was the redux of last time. And before diving into other matters, I can't help but make a comment on the present political or geopolitical moment that we find ourselves in, because I think if what I'm trying to argue from Eliyahu is correct, if it's the case that when we seek to unify the nation that is riven with disagreement and different kinds of idolatry and mistake and whatever, but if we seek to unify the nation on the substantive basis of all agreeing that we are going to defy and reject foreign gods because we see them for their falsity, then we merit Hakadosh Baruch Hu's wonders. And so if you buy that thesis, then I think we may be at a quite significant moment in the progression of the war, because the Americans, President Biden, one should say, and his administration, I mean, it goes without saying, in addition, the international pressure from all the other countries in the world that are less friendly to Israel, but the fair weather friends that we have in Washington, who sometimes act like enemies, have taken a very bold step recently in saying that they are going to try to choke off Israel's supply of weaponry in order to punish Israel for invading Rafah in the southern part of Gaza, and trying to destroy the last Hamas brigade that's hiding there. And we can table the discussion of whether whether destroying the brigade in Rafah would be enough, or whether Israel should be in the first place stuck in the situation of depending on American arms, and all the other elaborate discussions that one could have. The situation at the moment is that the U.S. is setting itself up in a confrontation with the Israeli government and trying to call it to heel and say, okay, game is over. We're the imperial overlord. We've decided that your war is over, even though you haven't achieved your most basic objective of removing from Gaza all the people who might shoot rockets at you and might invade you again and do the same things that they did on Shmini Atzeret at the start of the war. We're not going to allow you to do that because our gods are telling us that there's too much quote unquote civilian life that's at risk and endangered, although they have all sorts of other reasons that are much more cynical for behaving in this way. But that's the story that they would tell. And because the US has set this up, they're basically saying, okay, here's our idol, now bow. And what I think is remarkable with all of the criticisms, or even much sharper things than criticisms, that I have to love in the direction of or sharper words to love in the direction of our war cabinet and the leaders of this country for all the ways that they have dithered and dissembled and been deficient in their prosecution of the war. With all of that being said, setting that aside, at this particular moment, it seems like our backs are to the wall enough that a very broad segment of society and their political leadership may be willing to say, look, we are going to do what we need to do, and we're going to prosecute this war in the way that is appropriate for our future safety and thriving and flourishing and in our land. And we're not going to listen to these great powers that claim that they have a hold on us, and we're not going to bow to their idol, and we're going to go it alone. That has been now the rhetoric from uh, Netanyahu, from Gallant, and even Gantz has been making statements that comport with that, and he certainly backed the initial incursion into Rafiach that's already happened. But I think, as we know, we're still kind of waiting on the precipice to see what happens next. And I think there's a choice before Bibi and the rest of the leadership right now, because whatever they say, whatever they have said about, oh, we're definitely going in, the Rafiach, we're definitely going to destroy the rest of the Hamas fighters, they haven't done that yet, and they still have a choice to make. It seems like they're about to make the right choice, which is to ignore the Americans and tell them that their words have no hold on us and that we don't need them as long as we have HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is what Bibi seems to be saying right now in recent speeches. That's even what Gallant seems to be saying in recent speeches, with notably last mention of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But last I saw, he was standing in front of a huge banner, quoting a pasuk from Sefer Yirmiyahu about how Hashem forgives Ephraim. And I think that's a beautiful wrapping for that moment, for reasons connected with what we were talking about, comparing to the situation with Eliyahu in the Northern Kingdom that was dominated by Ephraim. But in any case, it seems like they may be on the brink of just saying, we actually are just going to go do what we need to. We're going to remember even just the attitude and the strength and the courage of conviction that the founders of the modern state of Israel had, who were, say what else you want about them, leaders who were willing, when it came to the survival of Am Yisrael, to say that they would do the opposite of what the greatest powers in the world were telling them to do, and know it was the right thing and not worry about it. It seems like we may be in a moment where our current leaders, with all of their deficiencies that we've listed on other occasions, may be grabbing hold of that heritage in the history of the modern state and really grabbing hold of something that runs much deeper and saying, we have to do this, and it's the right thing, and we know it's the right thing, and we're not going to learn what the right thing is from someone else's gods or bow to someone else's idols. And if that indeed continues to be the theme that characterizes how we go forward from here, then I think what we're learning from this study of Eliyahu and Nevi'e Baal and Har Carmel, of Elijah and the prophets of Baal in Mount Carmel, is that we will merit to see great wonders from the hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is, to some degree, enough for him for now, right? It's not the whole story, because turning away from other gods doesn't get you onto the right path completely. And there's still a lot else to work out. But it would be a very steep climb if we had to get the entire nation fully on board with some kind of correct form of Avodat Hashem in Hashem's eyes in order for us to merit his mercy and his help. And what our tradition and what our sources, what our sacred texts tell us is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is much more helpful and much more merciful and much more nurturing than that. And he's willing to give us credit for just taking one step in his direction that's truly in the right direction. So my great hope and tefillah, prayer for all of our leaders right now, is that they hear the words that they're uttering and they mean them and they believe them and they stick to their guns and they tell the American administration that they're a negligible joke in the calculus of what we need to get done right now, and they go and do what needs to get done, which won't, again, complete the question also of what happens in Gaza and then what else we need to figure out there. What actually needs to happen is that Jews need to be living there again. What actually needs to happen is that a much more expansive and heavy counter assault against all our enemies needs to be delivered in order for them to pay the full price for how this war began. And so it's not going to be enough to just make sure that every Hamas fighter currently holding a weapon ends up 6 feet under. But again, baby steps. That would be a worthy goal to set in the short term if it's to be prosecuted with commitment by people who are willing to do it, even when President of the United States and Kal v'chomer, everyone else is saying don't. So, Bezrat Hashem, we will see our leaders show the kind of resolve that Akadosh Baruch Hu is willing to reward, and subsequently we'll see Akadosh Baruch Hu put his stamp on it with, who knows, something unexpected like the walls of Jericho falling down to show us that he cares and that he's with us.